This happened about 2 years ago when I was 20. A little backstory, I'm quite a small female. I was doing some shopping in town alone. I still remember that it was a warm Sunday afternoon. People were out with their families and it was quite busy in the city center. I had some free time, so I decided on paying my grandma a visit. To get to her place, we needed to take a 20-minute bus ride from where I was. So, to the story. I was waiting for my bus and I noticed this man staring at me. He wasn't much older than I was, and I still remember that he had on a bright yellow hat. I usually don't really care when someone looks at me, but this man was staring at me with a sort of anger, like I had done something to him. Most people in the bus stop were either facing the traffic or looking at the coming buses, but not him. He had his back to the traffic and was just staring at me. I had a weird feeling about him, but I saw my bus coming and I just hoped he wouldn't get on. Except he did. I quickly sat in a window seat, and luckily for me, this old lady sat next to me. This old lady was like a shield between me and this guy. He stood next to our seat almost the whole ride, except for pacing around idly a couple of times. I was already quite freaked out, and I was texting my at-the-time boyfriend throughout it. While he hadn't actually done anything to me, I just had a really bad gut feeling. A few stops before mine, the old lady sadly got off the bus, and the guy's behavior became even weirder. He sat next to me, which made me completely tense up. I refused to even look at my phone or text anyone, in case he saw anything that he could use to look me up later. I think he sensed me tensing up, so he got up and went back to either side, standing next to my seat or pacing around the bus. My stop came and I waited until the last moment to get off the bus. Sadly, he also managed to get off the bus. What followed confirmed that he was indeed after me. I guess in an attempt to put me off again, he ran ahead of me on the road and kept glancing back. Him doing so actually gave me the only out from the situation. You see, if he would have kept walking behind me, I would have been forced to A, either make a run for the apartment door and hope that I was fast enough to close the door before him, or B, run in another direction and just hope that I would have reached any safe place before him. I was out of the city center now, and there weren't many people around either to help me. So in that split moment, I decided to turn around, walk in the other direction, and dial my mom. It's pretty bad, but I decided to call my mom in case anything happens to me, so she would know who it was. I told my mom what happened and she told me to make a run for it. Down the road, there was this small burger place that would have a security guard. She told me to run for it and just tell them what was going on. And so I did. I glanced back and saw the guy running after me, which almost made me cry. Luckily, I got to the burger place before he caught me. From the window, I saw him crossing the road. I guess him seeing me get into the burger place threw him off. I have no idea why he fixated on me or what his plans were if he had caught me. I'm not sure I even want to know. Alright, so this is something that I've been wanting to post here for a while, but I've just been too lazy. But alas, I'm stuck in a bus again with 40 minutes of time to kill and no music on my new phone. This happened to me this June. Our school exams start around June 20th every year, and well, I choose not to do math the entire year and study hardcore the last month. Our school is a private school that I can't afford without a scholarship, so I have to have good results in those exams. So I got a tutor, who's also my best friend's mom. I spent almost every day at their place, which is on the other side of our small city. I live in Armenia, for context, and we're a poor second world country, so our public transport kind of stinks. And taxis are expensive. Minimum from our place to theirs is about 1,000 drams, which is $2 but is more like 15 to us. So I have to take crappy minibuses for 40 minutes every time I go there and come back. Now until then, my experience with public transport was pretty mild. I'm a girl, which, if you're not an ogre, results in at least a small amount of unnecessary attention, but you get used to it after a while. Nothing too worrying. I get hit on once or twice and stared at a lot, but it doesn't really bother me. I get away most of the time because of my resting face. I look like the most unapproachable person on earth, let alone the bus or the station. So when this happened, I was beyond shook. That particular day, I had to stay longer than usual. It was 4 days before the exam and I was extra panicky. Also should note that I looked like absolute crap. My hair was greasy in a bun and I was wearing a huge hoodie and sweatpants. Not saying that's a horrible look for everyone, but me in particular. I looked like a potato sack with a head, and an onion on said head as hair. So I got out around 8:30, and it was already getting dark. When I got on the bus, it was fully dark and the bus was almost entirely empty. Now, to explain this property, you need to imagine the bus that I was in and how these seats are positioned. I was sitting on the first seat next to the window, the left one, and as I said, I was the first passenger here. So, 2 stops later, 3 men got on the bus. This dude, who had the full ability to sit anywhere that he wanted, sat next to me. I really didn't give him much thought because A, it's the first row seat. Maybe he just sat where he could. The other 2 dudes sat in the front next to the driver's seat. We drive for another 2 stops and a girl gets on. He gets up and moves to the seat behind us, and this girl sits next to me. He started talking to her and she still seemed quite uncomfortable, although giggled along. On the next stop, he moved to the singular seat next to the right window. Now, this is where the first red flags come in. He turns to her side, full body, and continues talking to her like, "Pretty girl, when you getting off here? Maybe with me?" And she's saying no and giggling uncomfortably. At this point, the driver himself is side-eyeing this dude. A stop later, she gets up to pay and he touches her thigh. She turns around and yells at him to stop. The driver turns around and calls him out, tells him to sit back and not move until he gets off this bus. Kudos to the driver, honestly. Stuff like this is common bus culture. Happened a couple of times to me and nobody ever said anything. Regardless, she practically jumps off the bus and speed walks away. My heart is racing at this point. I knew it would have been noble of me to protect her, but I honestly couldn't. I was scared of the dude and I wouldn't have stopped him. It's at 9:45 by now and these streets are emptying. I had my headphones in, but I turned the music off because, gosh, I'm scared of this dude and I'm alone with him, with no one but an old man, the driver, and one of the dudes from earlier who is fast asleep. And that's when he turns to me. "How old are you even?" I didn't answer and pretended that I didn't hear him. He didn't ask again. I was facing away from him, looking out the window. Instead, I felt the flash of his camera. I turned around and he was holding his phone at me. He was grinning and looking at me as if his friend, whom he just pranked or something. I didn't say anything and I continued to look out the window. At this point, I was full-on panicking. I opened my bag as casually as I could and mentally screamed to myself, I had left my pocket knife in my friend's earlier that week and kept forgetting to take it back. So I took my pencil out, one of the mechanical ones with a metal nib, and quickly put it in my pocket. And then another flash came, this time with the camera click too. I literally dialed 911 and sat there. I didn't call it, I just put the number in case, and I texted my friend. And then he was typing something. We got to my stop and I didn't ask for the bus to stop until we were right at it. The second that it was about to pass my stop, I basically screamed at the driver to slow down. He quickly stopped and I got off really fast. He didn't have enough time to get off after me as the driver drove off as soon as I had left, probably because he had realized what was happening and didn't want him to follow me. I still don't understand why anyone would need a picture of me. I don't even want to, especially not then, like that. A couple of days later, when I was at that bus stop, now heading from my place to my friend's place, I saw that guy again. He tried to talk to me, asked me how old I was again. I promptly told him that it's none of his business and I walked away. He tried to follow me, but I went into the local pet shop. I know the owner after 6 years of being their regular, and she told him to, more or less strongly, screw off. I never saw him again. A couple of things to note before I get into this story. This happened a fair few months ago in the dead of winter. Now I live in a place that is really cold once fall ends. I'm talking -35 is a brisk afternoon, and anything below that isn't uncommon. You have to bundle up is my point. Exposed skin equals frostbite, and bad. I am shameless about my need to stay warm. Like a coat down past my knees, 3 pairs of socks and boots and a beanie and scarf and gloves, shameless. Regardless of what I was wearing, this shouldn't happen, but either way, I just wanted to paint you all the picture. The last thing you guys need to keep in mind is that my university is kind of not in the best part of town. It's in the middle of downtown and very busy with both wealthy businesses and a lot of homeless people, most of which are pleasant and easygoing, but not all of them. My last class of the day had just ended and I was headed out to the bus stop across the street. Before doing so, I stopped at the smoker's corner and took a few drags from Ye Old Vape. I hate vapes or love them, but they got me off darts and that's what counts. A bunch of people were all smoking and vaping in the designated spot, and that included a homeless man that I had seen around many times. He generally kept to himself and I kept to myself. The guy was scraggly. I'm telling you, he must have been freezing, and normally I would feel bad for him if what happened next didn't happen. I see my bus pull up the street and head over to the actual stop. I had my headphones on and didn't notice that the homeless man was right behind me. I got on the bus and took a seat at the very back. It's a pretty long bus ride for me, so I normally keep to the back. But it's only then that I see the homeless guy get on. No biggie, I thought. It's a popular bus and goes through all of downtown before heading out towards where I live. I sit back and relax as the other students filter on. When the bus pulls away from the stop, I have a feeling of eyes on me. I don't think it's him, but maybe someone that I know from class. Looking up, I glance around and make the mistake of making eye contact with this homeless guy. Now maybe some other woman can vouch for me in the comments. Maybe men have the same sense too. But the second that I made eye contact with this guy, I knew that something was up. Dude was crazy. He smiled but stayed super dead in the eyes. I tried to be friendly but also quickly looked away. Because your girl is super proactive, I got on my phone and texted my dad right away. I didn't want to worry him, so I just asked him if he could pick me up at the convenience store about 2 blocks from my house. The thought was, if this guy follows me off, I don't want him to know where I live. I go to a public place and I wait for my dad. He says that he can pick me up, and that's great. My mind's at ease. I sit back, but man, this guy just stares at me the whole time. I can see it out of my peripheral vision, and it's really making me uneasy. 20 minutes go by and my bus stop comes up. I get up and he gets up. I go out the middle door of the bus and so does he. I cross the street and he follows. At this point, mentally, I'm in a slight panic, but I keep calm and I go into the store. It's a big place and enough people are milling around that I feel safe. I go for the makeup section first, and when I finally look back, he's not there. Thank God, a bullet dodged. Maybe I'm just paranoid. I spent some time looking at makeup I can't afford because of university, and my dad says that he'll be there in about 5 minutes. Perfect. Only as I go towards the site, I hear someone knock into one of those stands that are in the aisles with the sales stuff on it. I turn and it's the homeless guy again. So this dude followed me off the bus and into the store. Great. I walk to the junk food aisle and stay where other people are as much as possible before my dad shows up. I beeline it for the exit and hop into my dad's truck. When I get in and go to put my seatbelt on, I see the homeless guy walk out of the store and look around. For once, we don't make eye contact, and I am so grateful for that fact. My dad asked me why I wanted to be picked up here as he pulled away, and once we were out of the lot, I tell him about being followed, and then have to talk him down from going back to chew the guy out. I haven't seen the homeless guy around, at least not on the bus or by my university, but I am always on the lookout. My friend has this story that she tells sometimes because of how insane it is. I asked her if it was cool to share it with all of you, and she was game for it. Basically, there was this kid on the bus who sat in front of me. We didn't have assigned seats, but everyone kind of sat in the same place every day. He was obviously kind of an outcast. He was overweight and he smelled a little funny, and he didn't talk to people, wore glasses, all those things. There was a jerk on the bus who liked to make fun of him. One day, I had enough and I told the jerk to stop. After that, me and the kid started to talk a little bit. I tried to be nice, because he obviously didn't get a lot of interaction. But things quickly turned weird. He told me that he was a vampire, straight up. He gave me this whole story about this girl who was also a vampire that he knew. How she turned him, or how she had come into his room last night, starving, and she had fed on him. It was pretty weird, so I just tried to be like, yeah, okay. He told me that people had to carry a certain gene in order to be turned into a vampire, and that he could tell if it was someone had it by their smell. Of course I had it. Things got really weird when he started talking like a bad romance novel. Things like, I can't afford to have weaknesses, but I can't help caring about someone, and weird crap like that. It was pretty obvious what he was getting at, but I wasn't used to flirting, let alone whatever that was. So I just kind of sat and listened and tried not to make direct eye contact with the kid. But by far the weirdest thing was one of the last things that he said to me. He was telling me that everyone's blood has a distinct scent, and without prompting, he informed me, yours smells like chocolate chip cookies. So, chocolate chip pickup vampire. I'm not sitting next to you again. So, let me get a couple of things straight. Our little village was the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and I could count the amount of houses on 2 hands. We were a really quiet and close-knit community. Nothing ever happened here. Proper out-in-the-sticks stuff. One night a few years ago, my mom and my stepdad had gone out to this concert and left me in charge of my little brother and the dog. I wasn't very old, only about 14, and I felt really proud that my parents had trusted me enough to do that. I thought I was a pretty cool big brother, and I thought we would be doing cool babysitting stuff like staying up late, eating pizza, and so. I'm kind of glad we did, because I don't know what would have happened if we didn't. At about 10:30, the power cut out. I didn't think anything of it, because the weather hadn't been great lately, and I figured that I had to do something with it. I got some candles out of the cupboard and I lit them, and put some of our favorite songs on. As soon as I sat back down, Sonny, my little brother, turned to me and, being the weird little kid that he was, told me very calmly that someone was outside. I was a little perturbed by him, but the dog hadn't done anything, so I presumed it was just the neighbors or something. He just shrugged it off and went back to his drawings. There's a running joke in our house that you don't need a clock with the dog around, because he is such a creature of habit that he will consistently get up exactly the same time every night to tell you that it's time to initiate his nightly go-to-bed protocol. It was about 3/4 of an hour after the power went out when my dog decided that now was that time. I told Sonny to go get the dog his biscuit while I let him out to go to the bathroom. Now, our kitchen is an extension to the original house, and so as such has a flat roof that's completely low to the ground compared to the rest of the house, and offers easy access to the bathroom window. As I opened the door so the dog could do his thing, Sonny pushes past me in the doorway and whispers, "I know you're out here, and I'm calling the police." As he turned around with the biggest, proudest smile you have ever seen on his face, there was a very distinct rustling coming from just above the doorway. I don't think I'll ever forget the way Sonny's face dropped when he looked just above my head. I looked up. The man sitting on the roof above me panicked, tried to kick me, and then ran off into the next door's garden, and presumably into the cornfields surrounding our village. I was scared, and Sonny was bawling his eyes out. I ushered him inside as quickly as I could and got a knife from the kitchen. We both went to his room and I told him to try and get some sleep, while I waited for our parents to come back. It was an agonizingly long 4 hours before they did. My stepdad immediately went outside to check to see if everything was alright. I heard them talking about how somebody had smashed the fuse box. Obviously, we called the police, but they didn't come until later that day. They did a search of the immediate premises and found a makeshift bed in a nearby, disused barn, along with pictures of silhouettes of us in the shower through the frosted glass. I think it's pretty safe to say the whole experience definitely shook us up. We moved out as soon as we could, but I still shut the curtains whenever I can, and I see shadows underneath every door that I see. Sonny keeps quiet about it for most of it, but I'm not sure if that's just because his brain has cut it out or what. My family used to live on the far outskirts of a city on the west coast. This city happens to be where I was born but no longer live. The city in question is somewhat notorious for being home to addicts and members of a few street groups. But before this, I foolishly thought that if you were dealing with one of the few landowners in the outskirts, you were pretty safe, and we're not speaking to the type of crazies that filled the town proper. The incident in question started about a month before the big finale, as it were. My stepfather was out of town to deal with a family grievance, and so it was my mother, my 2 little sisters, and I to start with. Our landlord, who I thought to be a pretty normal person, started to make frequent appearances on the property. Nothing creepy so far, but he kept going into tangents about the bushes that grew on the side of the yard, what species they were, when they would bloom, and how the flowers looked. This went on for a week or so before finally he told us he was looking to sell the land that we had been living on, and that we would need to get started with the process of packing up. Our landlord's visits could continue without my stepdad home. He would say strange things here and there, but it all came to a head one night when he showed up, long before our eviction date. He was wild-eyed, speaking really funny, and it hit me like a rock. This man was very, very high on something. He started screaming at us that all the vehicles needed to be removed from the side of the property by a certain date. And then he wandered off to an empty lot adjacent to the house and started pulling his shirt off while spinning in circles. Needless to say, my family were all freaked out and trying to call Dad to come home before this weirdo went from alarming to dangerous. He was screaming now that he knew my dad had drugs and that we'd better share them with him. My dad was very anti-drug. We looked away for a brief moment to get some things done in the house when we heard his truck leave the property. Thinking that we were done with the landlord for the day, we started to calm down when suddenly up the drive comes the landlord and a few tow trucks. Seeing as my mother was unlicensed, she couldn't comply with the landlord's demand to move the cars or they would be towed immediately. We ended up calling the sheriff while blowing up my dad's phone at the same time. The sheriff arrived to see this man raving at the tow truck drivers to haul everything away and to bill it to my dad. We explained to the sheriff that we had given several days to move the vehicles, but he had showed up with the tow crew that same night. The sheriff managed to calm the landlord down, got him to stop screaming obscenities at us for a moment at least. The landlord left that night, and we assumed he would be back the next day to finish what he had started. We started to turn back to the house when the sheriff stopped my mom and told her in a dead serious voice, "I think he may try to come back into the house. If he does, call us. I can't tell you to shoot him, but if he forces his way inside and you fear for your family, you do what you have to do." This little bit stuck with me since having an officer tell my mom that she was okay to do this if the landlord came back. The rest of the night was uneventful and we made sure to call up family to help us pack quickly the next few days. We managed to get moved out before he could make another appearance, though we had to stay with my uncle for a little while things were prepared in the house that we were supposed to move to. I still worry to this day that I'll run into my former landlord when I visit my old hometown. Hi everyone, so this happened about a year ago and it's still pretty freaky. For context, my friend and I are both 22-year-old females. My friend Anna and I were bored one weekend and decided to go to a popular beach to take some pictures and just mess around. So we took pictures and had a really lovely day. But then on the way back, we were starving, so we decided to stop at McDonald's in the beach town. This town is like really famous and nice. All these celebrities live there and it's beautiful. There's also a super famous restaurant right off the highway on the beach that's known for celebrities and rich people going. This McDonald's was directly across the street from the restaurant. Since so many famous people go to this restaurant and it's on a pretty busy road, most of them have drivers that take them, usually in big black Escalades. The driver would usually hang out at the parking lot of that McDonald's while their bosses ate across the street. Anna and I didn't know this at the time. We just wanted a McFlurry. So we go to McDonald's and right when we get out of the car, she starts acting really weird. She triple checks that the car doors are locked and grabs her fancy camera to bring inside. I ask her what's up and she says that there is a group of guys, the drivers, standing in front of McDonald's smoking and staring at us, and it was giving her the creeps. I'm a pretty chill and trusting person, so I don't think much of it. It's a busy place in a super nice town. I'm not worried. We go in and there are a few other people in there about our age. We get to our food and we sit at the table to eat. One of the drivers comes in and sits a few booths down with his back to the wall, right where he can see us. My back is to him, but Anna gets really creeped out and wants to leave. This guy isn't eating nor anything. He's just staring at us. Again, this is a pretty crowded McDonald's in one of the nicest towns in Southern California, so I feel pretty safe. Living in South Central, you get used to the odd creep. But still, Anna was freaked out, so I agreed to go. I just had to run to the bathroom first. It was one of those McDonald's where the counter and main dining room were in one big room. And then there was sort of a hallway off to the side of the counter with more seating, and the bathroom at the end, way in the back. There was also a door going outside, right next to the bathrooms. The bathroom only had 2 stalls, and I just walked into the first one, not really paying attention to whether or not anyone else was in there. So I'm doing my thing, and then I hear the door open, and I hear Anna call my name. At this point, I'm very confused since she's supposed to be watching her stuff, and I'm like, "Yeah, what's up? Are you okay?" "Yeah, just going to the bathroom," I reply. She was like, "Oh, okay," and just stands there in the doorway. After a second, I hear her leave, and I'm thinking, that's very weird. So I walk out of the bathroom and see her waiting by the door with all of our stuff in her hands. I ask her what's going on and why she came in the bathroom. And she just looks at me really panicky and is like, "We need to leave right now." At this point, I'm still not afraid, just confused. We rush out to the car and she starts telling me what happened. It turns out, when I walked into the bathroom, the creepy driver followed me in a little while after. I don't remember hearing him come in, but maybe I did and just assumed someone had either been in the stall next to me and was leaving, or had just come to check their makeup or something. I'll be honest, I really wasn't paying attention. I know for sure I wasn't aware that anyone had entered the stall next to me, because he didn't close the stall door when he came in. She was on her phone, so she didn't see him follow me either. A young guy noticed it and went up to my friend, asking if we knew the driver. Frantic, she told me that we did not and ran to check on me. He was in the stall next to me with the stall door open. It was the large handicap stall, not making a sound. She came in and didn't see him, so she called my name to make sure that I was still alive, and he rushed out of the stall past her. She was in shock, and didn't know what to do other than gather our things and prepare to run. When we went to her car, he was sitting in his big black car with tinted windows next to us, still staring. We sped off, and when I got the story, we called the McDonald's to let them know what happened. They didn't really care. And then we called the non-emergency sheriff line to report it as well, which was closed. Thank you, Malibu, for nothing. Eventually, my mom went full-on mama bear and threatened to blast it all over social media that they didn't take my report seriously, and she got a hold of someone at corporate from there. They checked their cameras and they saw the guy follow me in. A police report was made, so hopefully this never happens to anyone else again. Honestly, thank God nothing happened, but it was really scary. The guy who was sitting in his car staring at us when we left, who knows what he was planning on doing. We moved into a house in the country about 4 months ago. Since we had previously lived in an apartment, that means we needed to buy a lawnmower. Instead of putting out about $200 on a lawnmower, when we would have to move again in a few years, we decided to hire somebody to cut our grass. Initially, we went with a guy that my fiance used to work with, but $65 every 2 weeks starts to add up, and I was looking for something cheaper. And that brings me to Charles. Charles posted in my Facebook classified that he was looking for some lawns to cut this weekend, and that he had a reputable company. So I sent him a message. Initially, Charles came off as nice. He asked me for my address so he could stop by and give me an estimate. After stopping by my house, he sent me a message saying, "Dang, sweetheart, you got a big porch." Made me kind of uncomfortable, but figured I was overreacting and started planning when he could come out. I told him my off days and he assured me that I didn't have to be home. I told him to come Wednesday. Wednesday morning he messaged me, "Are you home?" I said no. 3 hours later, "Are you home yet?" I told him, "No, I won't be until after 8. Charles then informed me that his tire had a flat and he would come tomorrow. Thursday. The first thing in the morning he messaged me, "Will you be home today?" I told him no. He messaged me back a few hours later, "Hey, are you home?" I said no, I told you that I wouldn't be home all day, are you still coming out? He then told me that his truck broke down. He was sending messages like, "Please don't be upset with me, sweetheart." At this point, I was getting really creeped out and I told him to just come tomorrow. Friday. It was actually my day off, but I woke up and left the house for the day. He messages me, "Hey, I'm coming, you're off today, right?" I said yeah, but I'm not home. "Well, when will you be home?" "I don't know." He messaged me later saying, "Sorry babes, I was loading equipment onto my truck and it fell and broke. Maybe I can come tomorrow." At this point, I was really creeped out and told him, "Never mind, I'm gonna find somebody else." Saturday. I get off work around 4 or 5 and check my phone and find multiple messages from him saying that he had to cut my grass and I need to come home and give him the money. I told him no, that I'll cash app it to you. He started getting really irate and saying that I need to give him the money now. I told him that I would give him the money after I got home and thought the grass was cut. I was honestly really worried that he would be waiting at my house, so I got a friend to drive home behind me. He wasn't there. I sent him the money and thought that that was the end of it. Fast forward to 2 months later, I'm on the phone with my fiance as I drive to class and he tells me that he has to get off the phone because there's somebody walking down our driveway. I asked what he meant, and he said there was a man walking around in our driveway in the front yard. After I got to class, he texted me telling me that it was just a man who had come by to promote his lawn care business. I didn't think anything about it because it had been 2 months at this point. But later that night I got home and saw a business card land on my counter with the name of the man who had been messaging me earlier. I called my fiance, Mike, at work and asked how the guy had been acting. He said Charles seemed genuinely surprised that a man had come out and asked if he lived alone. I asked Mike if the man had stopped at any other houses and he replied, "Now that I think of it, no." After we left our house, he just left. Mike said that he had seemed really desperate to help around the house and offered to cut the lawn and fix our porch, remove any trash or scrap metal that we had around the house, and then asked if we had any pests such as bats in our attic or anything. That really freaked me out because we do have a bat problem and I had previously posted about it on Facebook. Mike then said what was really weird is Charles was very freaked out about the dog. He heard Max barking from inside and started asking a lot of questions like, is he big? Does he stay outside or inside? Does he ever go outside or does he stay inside completely? How big is he? Is he nice? Mike chalked it up to him being just scared of dogs. He gave him a brief tour of the outside of the house and then Charles got in his truck and left. I then told Mike that this was the same guy who had been messaging me earlier in that year, and Mike began to freak out. He said that Charles had asked a lot of really specific questions about who all lived here, how long they lived here, and where they were at the time. He said he tried to brush them off, but Charles seemed really insistent to know if Mike was the only one in the house. Before he left, Mike specifically asked him if he had cut the lawn here before, or something, and maybe he was thinking of the last owners. But Charles told him, "No, I just happened to be on my way out this way and thought I would promote my business to the neighborhood." And the worst part, I had taken my fiance's car to work that day, which means my car was in the driveway when Charles stopped by. He thought that I was home alone. I didn't contact the police because I thought that I might be overreacting. This all happened 2 days ago and I hope that I never see him again. To really understand the story, or maybe how it happened, you need to know a few things. I live in Belgium, and at the time of the events, around 2018, I lived at home with my parents, siblings, an older brother and sister, and my sweet dog. Looking back now, maybe my dog is a bit too sweet. Also important to note is that my family is all over the place. Everybody is always busy doing something. Everyone has a very different rhythm, and some days we live next to each other instead of with each other. So that is why at the time I didn't really know who was home and who wasn't. But we do love each other. So in 2018, on a school night, I woke up to some noises in my room. I was confused and I looked at my phone. It was around 3 a.m. You know that feeling when you wake up very abruptly and don't know if you're dreaming or awake? That was kind of how I felt. There's a street light right at my window, so even though the curtains were closed, I could still make out some silhouettes and figures. As I just woke up, and wasn't really thinking, I thought the silhouette that I saw in my room was my older brother. I was sleep drunk, as you could call it, and started asking him what he was doing, but he didn't really react. I saw him walking towards my jewelry, and I asked him again what he was doing. Again, my brother didn't respond. I was still laying in bed and I began to feel angry because I had school the next day and I had to get up early. And as you do with irritating siblings, I started to yell at him. "Dude, get the F out, I have school tomorrow." This time he looked at me, but he didn't say anything. He started to walk toward my handbag and started looking in it and taking things out. At this point, I was just angry at my brother and finally got out of bed. Mind you, the lights are still off. I walked towards him and asked him again, "What the F are you doing? Get out." And I physically started pushing him slightly towards the door. Then he spoke. "Where's the money? Where's the money?" In like this very strange, almost fake accent. And seriously, I started laughing it off. I still thought that it was my brother. "Okay, I don't know if you're drunk or just being an a-hole, but get out." But this time, we were almost at the door, and I was still pushing him out, and he left and I closed the door. Finally, I thought as I went back to bed, but I started feeling unsettled. I got nervous and scared and started thinking it over. Did I smell cigarettes? My brother doesn't smoke, and why would he act so strange? So, just to be sure, I texted my brother, "Where are you?" His answer made my heart sink to my knees. "I just left the gym. I'll be home in a minute." I immediately called him and frantically explained there was just someone in my room. I started crying as I was panicked and asking him what to do. He said to call the police and to stay in my room. As the gym was really close to our home, my brother came home like literally a minute or two later. I was still upstairs on the phone with the police while I heard my brother yell a whole lot of curse words and "get out." At that point, I was in the upstairs hallway because my sister woke up and was standing there too. My father had fallen asleep downstairs on the couch, so when he heard my brother scream, he immediately woke up and knew something was wrong. He went to the downstairs hallway and saw my brother chasing the intruder. At this point, they were already at the front door. My brother managed to take a backpack from the intruder, but sadly, he got away and fled. My brother did get a good look at him though. So the police came and I was actually in shock. All this time, my mother was asleep because she's on strong sleeping meds. She woke up during the chase when my sister and I were standing in the hallway. I was crying and she came up to us. I frantically told her what had happened and she said, "Ah, little one, that was a very bad dream." That's one of the things we still laugh about today. While we were talking to the police, we had to describe the person. I told them exactly what had happened and how he looked. Due to the streetlight, I could see the clothes that he was wearing. He had a hood on, so I didn't see his face, and when I was close, he always turned his back toward me. And so I'm telling the police lady about his black pants and green hoodie, and then she abruptly stopped me. "Green? Your brother said light gray." That's the second time my heart dropped to my knees. There were two guys, not one. Both my brother and I were 100% sure about what we saw, so there had to have been two guys. They took a few iPads, phones, and wallets, but luckily, my brother took the backpack where there was a lot more valuable things that they didn't get away with. But the burglars were kind of stupid because we still had Find My on all our Apple devices, and they were still running. A day later, when we saw the location, my brother jumped in his car with my father while on the phone with the police. Really, my brother is pretty awesome. Going to the gym at night, and he's in the military, chasing intruders through the house. I wouldn't mess with him. They waited for the police, and they went in the house where the location of our devices were, and found one guy. He was crying and covered in his own stuff. They arrested him and he confessed. He said that he was high on drugs and it was the first time he ever did something like that. He was very panicky and cried the whole time. My brother recognized him as the intruder that he had chased, so that meant the guy who was in my room was still out there. The guy eventually snitched on the other guy, but he was nowhere to be found. We all kind of got on with our lives, but I was really scarred. I slept with the lights on for more than a year, and every time I would wake up past 3 a.m., I wouldn't be able to go to sleep anymore. The intruder that they caught went to jail for a year. It was his first time. Ed is now in a rehab program. He has sent us a letter or two with our consent, and we kind of feel bad for him. He was traumatized too. But half a year ago, we heard that the second man was taken into custody. I was finally over it. I mean, it wasn't as bad as the beginning, but of course, I still got scared sometimes. But now they finally caught the man that was in my room. What we found out was unsettling by the least. While the dude that we found first didn't have a record before this happened, the dude who was in my room was a very, very experienced criminal. He had multiple possession charges, theft, drunk driving, and worst of all, assault and attempted homicide. The man that I talked to, cursed out and pushed out of my room at 3 a.m., was dangerous, and I'm very happy to be alive. So this happened about 13 years ago. I was 10 at the time and my brother was 8. We had just moved to a new town that year, and the Walmart here had this sweet arcade up near the service desk. So every time my parents would bring us grocery shopping, they would give us a few dollars and let us play in the arcade. The town had an incredibly low crime rate, and the arcade is at the front of the store where dozens of people are checking out. So what could possibly go wrong? My brother is playing the claw machine, while I'm standing on the side of the machine, trying to help him angle the claw perfectly above a stuffed animal that he's trying to get. Suddenly, this random hillbilly walks up to the claw machine next to us, inserts a quarter and begins moving the claw around. But for most of this time, he's making eye contact with my brother and smiling, not even watching the game. He's not talking to us, just staring and smiling. He has long, thin brown and silver hair, pulled back into a loose ponytail at the base of his skull, a camo trucker hat, and a long, scraggly beard. I remember vividly the way that he smelled. Stale beer, ashtray, and something that smelled like a sweet yet sour dirt, or a fungus. He tries making small talk with my brother and I, who were raised to be aware of strangers but to still be polite. Eventually, we get bored of the game we're playing and I usher my brother to follow me to a new game, all the way on the opposite side of the arcade. A few seconds later, the man follows us, stationing himself once again at the claw machine next to us. At some point, an overweight lady walks in and says to the hillbilly, "What are you doing to these little kids?" and snickers at me. He replies, "I'm trying to win them some stuffed animals." She then begins playing the claw on the other side of us, so that my brother and I are sandwiched between these two strange hillbillies. His comment comes across as weird to me, because previously I thought he was maybe trying to win something for his kids, but this entire time, he's just been following my brother and I from game to game, trying to win us toys. This has been going on for maybe 20 minutes at this point. They've followed us to several different machines and spent a lot of money. The games were all 25 cents per play. Each time, my brother and I switched machines. They would follow us. The hillbilly says to the lady, "I'm out of money, you got any?" She says, "Nah, I'm broke too." My brother says, "I have $1 still." Now, this is the part that really scared me. I remember listening to these two talk about some weird things with us, asking if I have a boyfriend, asking where we go to school, where our parents work, asking if we've ever done drugs. But when my brother said that he had $1, she responded with the most terrifying thing I'd heard from them yet. The woman suddenly burst out, "Well, crap, then give it to me, boy." Her face was red. The tone in which she shouted was so ear-piercing and gut-wrenching that I could feel the blood drain from my face. My brother looked like he was about to cry. He hands her the $1 and her face lights up. She laughs it off, almost like she's trying to make it seem like she was joking when she had yelled at us. My father walks up a couple of minutes later. As I turn to tell him that these people have spent close to $15 to win toys for us, they leave hurriedly before he gets a good look at them. My dad is livid. He takes us up to the front desk and tells them what I told them. They make an announcement on the intercom to keep an eye out for these people, and to report to an employee if they see them. And then they call the police. I don't actually remember this part, or much of anything after my father arrives, but this is what he told me. They never did find the couple, and the police reviewed security cameras. They were too blurry to make out any physical description, and told my parents that the couple left the store immediately after my father showed up, without any groceries. Every time that I see a man or a woman in Walmart that looks as I remember them, I get anxiety and try to avoid them. Early last year, I had a strange encounter that you all might find interesting. So, a quick tidbit about myself. I help people as often as I can, including giving money to homeless people, or giving rides to hitchhikers if we're going the same way. 98% of the time, the worst I've encountered is awkward conversations, and being asked if I have drugs to sell. No matter what though, I don't mess with people at night, or in groups, and I keep weaponry on hand though. I've never needed to show it. This is not one of those times. I lived in a lower income area of my city, and only about a half a mile from the local homeless shelter. So I've seen plenty of people in a sad state during the 2 years that I've lived here. My apartment building kind of sat in a little valley with a little ravine across the street that deer often hung out in. They let our bus shelter on really rainy days. I lived on the 3rd floor. So one day, I come home. It's blowing snow at around 15 degrees out. In my entryway is a dude sitting on the staircase. It was obvious that he was homeless and looking for a place to warm up, as he was wearing 4 days worth of clothing at once, and had 2 backpacks with him. Not a big deal as long as he's not there when the building is locked up for the day. Our security consisted of having locks set for a 9 to 5 office hour. As I pass him on the staircase, I give him a smile as I do to literally every other stranger, not screaming at me on the planet. He stops me and he tries to talk to me. Now it's obvious that he doesn't speak very good English, but I was able to discern that he was asking for water, and that he was waiting for a friend who lived in the building to come home. Yeah, no problem. I head up to my apartment to get water for him, and he follows me. This was a bit uncomfortable, but I was already having a hard time communicating with him, so I let it slide. And this is where things go wonky. My apartment was an efficiency where the bathroom was right inside the front door, and then a tiny hallway into, well, everything else. I walk to the kitchen to get the water and he points at the bathroom. Yeah, sure, dude. I have cleaning supplies. That's what they're there for. And so I go around the corner, pull out a couple of bottles of water from the fridge and come back. And he's standing there, buck naked in my hallway. And then it dawns on me. Water. He was asking for a shower. Oh God. And then he tries to ask me to join him. No, that's a hard pass. You understand, no. He goes into the shower and I pace in my living room trying to figure out how the frack I can communicate to him that he needs to leave. Cause things went from uncomfortable to creeptastic in 0.6 seconds. And then it got worse. He comes out again, buck naked, without a towel, and begins wandering around my apartment, commenting on everything. And his you-know-what is a little excited too. Did I mention that part? Yeah, I lose it. Politely, because once you're in retail, that never goes away. And I try to get him to put clothes on. He doesn't understand me. I pull up my phone, pull up Google Translate and show him the list of languages. He understood what I was asking and he selected Somalian. Goody, that's some progress. Now that the things he's commenting on, in terrible half-English, is, you live alone. Does this TV work? Nope. Done. I typed into Google Translate, asking if he needed to call his friend or call the apartment management. He gives me a thumbs up and then climbs into my loft bed. I guess I'm cleaning that too now. So I'm like, which one? Another thumbs up. Okay, so he either didn't get what I was trying to do with the app after all, or he can't read. Eventually, my lizard brain took a breather from panicking long enough for the logic part of my brain to take over, and I went to where his clothes were and pointed at them and then at the door. He got dressed and left. Simple, done, over. I shake for about 2 hours, drink a six-pack, and post what happened to Facebook. In that time, it dawns on me that I probably just got staked for theft. So I spend another hour double and triple checking my security camera, which I originally got to check on the puppy that I was training at the time, for later. Guess what? The next day, he was back on these stairs again. I tried to be pleasant, but made it very clear with head shakes and a roundabout trip back down the stairs, and back up the other flight on the other side of the building to my apartment, that I wasn't going to help him again, or be his buddy. 2 days after that, he was there again. I told the landlady, and she had him removed, and I never saw him again. And before you ask, no, nothing was stolen. I moved to the exact opposite end of the city 4 months ago. Things have been going well since then. This story takes place 3 months ago at a karaoke bar. My boyfriend's older sister Angie and I went out for the first time together, and we went to this bar that hosts a karaoke night every Friday night. She had a guy friend named Paul who met us there, who had a crush on her, and he bought us drinks the entire night. We were having a good time. It was like 2 a.m. and we were sitting outside because both Paul and Angie smoke, but I don't. But because I didn't want to stay in there alone or anything, I went with her. We found a wooden table with a bench-like seats, and 2 of them sat on one side of the table, and I was on the other side by myself talking with them. Some random guy, Pete, was behind me, standing like 3 feet away, leaning on the wall, but like he was close enough that I could see him if I moved my eyes to the left a little bit. Angie is very outgoing, and so, as we were talking, she ended up asking him some questions. I can't remember what she asked because I wasn't paying attention to them, but rather the people who were talking around us. But he ended up responding and slowly was approaching my side of the table. And once he got to my side, he sat down beside me, at which I already started to get a weird vibe from him. I was talking to Angie about something, and when I stopped, Pete started asking where I was from, since it was clear I am not from England, since I don't have a British accent. I told him that I'm from Canada, and he told me he works for immigration at the airport, and to which I said, "Oh, nice," not showing much interest. He asked what I could possibly be doing here, and I replied by telling him that I was here visiting my boyfriend. Angie was even talking about how she was here with her brother's girlfriend, me, to other people that she was having conversations with. Pete had both his arms resting on the table, one of his hands holding his glass of whatever he was drinking that night, and then he moved the hand that was closest to me and put it on his lap. But being that I'm a very observant person, I noticed this and was starting to feel really uncomfortable. As Angie and Paul were talking about stuff with the other people who were outside, because my hand was resting on my lap, he moved over on the bench to be closer to me and reached for my hand and held it, but really firmly and hard. I quickly pulled it away and moved myself over a bit on the wooden bench and put my hand that he just held on the table and held onto my drink. He put it back in his lap, and within a few minutes later, he was reaching under the table again, but this time he grabbed my knee and held it. I pushed the hand away and repeated, "I have a boyfriend," to him, and even Angie was like, "Dude, she has a boyfriend, in case you didn't hear the first 3 times we said it." And so we carry on outside for the next hour, and when it gets to 3 a.m. when the bar closes, Angie and I were going to go back home, but she decided she wanted to hang out at Paul's house for a bit and drink more there and stuff, and so I agreed. But all of a sudden, Pete asked, "Oh well, can I come with you? I'm only here for tonight and I'll go back to where I live tomorrow." And Angie said, "I mean, it's not my house, but if my friend is fine with it, then sure." So Paul allowed him to come along to his place with us. Angie called an Uber to get us to Paul's house. While we waited at the table for the Uber, Pete said, "We can go back to my hotel room and wait for an Uber. I'm staying right here." The bar was a part of the hotel. So Angie, of course, agreed, but I didn't like the idea that much because he kept saying how pretty we look the entire time we were going to his hotel, and plus, I didn't know how to get home myself since I had no idea even where I was, so I just followed them. We get in the room and we wait 10 minutes for the Uber. The whole time, Pete is full on staring at us, smirking, and for God knows whatever the reason was. We eventually got to her friend's house. Pete is flirting with me and even rubbed my leg again when I was sitting on the floor because I wasn't feeling too good. Skip to when we all leave. Pete tells us that he was going to book an Uber for himself, so naturally, Angie and I book a separate Uber to get home. But I ended up glancing down at his phone when he was booking the Uber, and he never actually booked a ride. He was just chilling on the app, acting like he was. I thought this was weird. So 15 minutes later, our Uber is outside. It's like 5 a.m. now. Pete was like, "Hey, can I just hop in there with you two?" And Angie replied kind of hesitantly like, Okay. But I thought your Uber was on its way though." And he was like, "I don't know," but with the weirdest tone in his voice. So he has a smoke outside of the car. He smokes as well before getting in. Her and I are in the car with the driver, and that's when I tell her that he never actually booked a ride for himself. We both looked at each other in confusion for a second, and you could tell that now she was seeming to be a bit more cautious with what she was doing or saying with him. So the plan was, the Uber was going to drop us two off first and then take him to wherever he was going. So because of this, she asked the driver to take us to the road before the one with our house on it, because she didn't want him to know where we lived because now she didn't really trust him. Pete finally gets into the car. I'm on the right side and she is in the middle, and he gets in on the left. The whole time, I can hear him trying to flirt with her and saying some stuff like, "You wanna hook up?" And then at one point he was like, "She can join in too." And she kept saying no a bunch of times to him. I was looking out the window because I didn't want to look at him at all. But when he said that, I gave him a weird look. But I don't think he really paid any attention to it. I looked back out of my window, and this is when it got a lot more weird and creepy. He kept saying that he was coming home with us, and not going back to wherever he was going. He was not letting up on coming home with us. Angie told him that we were walking home after a certain point because she didn't have the money to pay for the whole ride, which obviously was a lie. And he was like, "That's okay, I'll just follow you home, and we can have a good time." So finally, after like 10 minutes of this, she was like, "Can you pull over?" to the driver. And he was very confused by this, probably because he never got asked this, and said, and she was like, "Please, pull over now." And so we did. Pete started to wonder why she was doing this and asked, "What are you doing, babe?" And she was like, "I told you, you aren't coming back with us. Get out." At this time, I was looking at him directly. She was getting angry because he wasn't getting out of the car. She started raising her voice and was like, "We aren't moving until you get the heck out of this car and call yourself a different Uber." Pete started to get kind of serious now and was like, "Why? What did I do? I'm sorry." And she just replied, "Leave." To that, he told her that he was only leaving if she gave him her number, and she refused. And then he told us that he wasn't leaving the car until she did so. So she said fine and took his phone, put in some random number she thought of it, and gave it back to him. He was still trying to convince her to let him stay with us, but she wasn't having any of it and told him goodbye. He got out of the car finally and she slammed his door shut and told the Uber to get away from there and to take us home. I was worried the next time I went to that bar because Pete would be there, but I haven't seen him since this situation. I always wondered what would have happened if Angie wasn't as outgoing as she was and kicked him out of the car. I think we would have been in some serious trouble. Okay, so first off, this happened a few months ago. I had just moved into an apartment complex and had only a bed, a TV, a rocking chair, and an Xbox One. I work in a town that is an hour away and they didn't have anything available that I could move into. So this big city was the next closest place that was also in my price range. The first few weeks play out the same. I get up, shower, go to work for 10 hours and come home, eat, watch a little Netflix, and go to sleep and repeat. On my days off, I travel 3 hours away to see my wife and kids. Now we aren't divorced or separated. I had to relocate from the town we lived in to start my career in asset protection, as an asset protection manager. One night, as I was going through my evening routine, someone knocks on my door. It's a woman, maybe 5'7" with brown hair, and she's skinny. She looked like she was methed out of her skull. Her eyes were barely even open. She asked to talk to somebody named Jareth. I told her no one by that name lived here, and she said that he did. She said that she was here last Thursday and he was here. She wanted to buy drugs from him, and this was the address she was given. I once again told her that no one was named Jareth and they lived here, and I shut the door on her. She started banging on the door, crying how she needed her fix. I told her to get lost. After a few moments, I heard someone yell at her to shut up, or that they were calling the cops. The banging stopped and I never saw her again. I sat back down and continued watching the movie that I had on. I started thinking about what the woman had said. She couldn't have been here last Thursday. I was off work last Thursday and Friday with my wife and children. I started to look around more closely. Nothing seemed out of place. I checked all the windows. Nothing was cracked or broken. All these security bars were locked in their places. There were no upper attic spaces, nor crawl spaces, and nothing. I felt a little more secure and went about my night as usual. My next days off, I made sure everything was locked and nothing was out of place. And I went to see my wife as usual. I told her about what had happened. She suggested that I take the pellet gun. Now I know, what is a pellet gun going to do? Well, in her thinking, it looked like a real gun. In the dark, no one can really tell the difference. And same for at a distance. Plus it had a CO2 cartridge in it and 10 pellets. So I took it. When I got back, I looked around. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was missing. I put my stuff up as usual and I turned on my Xbox. This is where I noticed something was off. When it powers on, it takes you to the home screen. But on this screen, you can see the last thing you were on plus the previous things you have done. When I left last the Netflix app, it should have been the first one on there, but it wasn't. Instead, it was Battlefield 1. From before that, it was Mortal Kombat. Someone had been using my Xbox. I once again did a thorough search of the apartment. Nothing. It was a couple of days after that the guy across from me approached me while I was getting out of my vehicle. He said that a lot of people were coming by the apartment on certain nights, and they were making a lot of noise and it keeps his daughter up, and if I could keep it down or just stop doing whatever it was that I was doing on those nights. I was confused. I must have shown it because his expression changed. He asked me if I was the one who was having people over at odd hours of the night. I told him no. I proceeded to tell him the things that were happening. I told him that I'm 200 miles away on my days off, and we both came to the conclusion that someone was getting into my apartment when I wasn't there. I made the decision not to go see my family 1 week to see if the person using my apartment would show up. Of course, no one came that week or the week after. It dawned on me at work one day during a conversation about how shoplifters would try to see what vehicle you drove, to know if you were there, that it hit me. Whoever was using my apartment knew what I drove. With that in mind, I waited until my next days off to set my trap. On the same day, I parked my vehicle 3 complexes down and walked back. I unscrewed all of my light bulbs and waited in the corner in the living room. I had to let my neighbor know what I was doing in case any trouble occurred. I put my phone to its lowest brightness and had my camera ready, flash and all. I waited for 6 hours, which felt like forever, before it happened. I heard the front door knob jiggle. I got up, phone in one hand and pellet gun in the other. The door opened and someone entered, shutting it behind them. And then I heard it click and then another. They were trying to switch on the lights. I then saw a light from the doorway. They had their phone out and they were making their way into the room that I was in. As soon as they entered the doorway, I snapped a picture. The brightness of the flash caught him completely off guard. He was momentarily stunned, cursing at me, trying to make his way back to the front door. I yelled at him to get out and to never return. He had reached into his pocket, dropping something as he pulled out a small pocket knife. I immediately raised the pellet gun and cocked the hammer. That stopped him completely. He dropped the knife, opened the door, and ran out. My neighbor, who had heard me yelling, was waiting outside of his place when the man ran out. He saw me run out of my apartment, gun and all, and asked if I had shot him. I told him no, that it was a pellet gun, but the man didn't know. I went back to the door and retrieved the pocket knife and what he had dropped. It was a key to my door. I don't know how he got it, but he had it. I showed the picture to my neighbor, and he thought that he had recognized him, but he wasn't sure. I stayed up late that night, calling my wife and telling her what had happened. The next day, I went over to the complex office and told them what had happened. I brought up the fact that he had a key to my door and I wanted to know why he did. They weren't sure, and then I showed them the picture of the man. They knew right then and there how he had a key. Turns out the person who was going into my apartment complex was a maintenance worker for them. He had been one of the ones renovating my apartment before I had moved in. They were giving keys and he must have made a copy of one. Then for nights at a time he would use it to do whatever it was he did. I must have put a hamper in his nightly business when I moved in. That is, until he figured out my routine. The man was, of course, fired from his job and prohibited from entering the grounds again, and I was given 3 months of free rent. I never pressed charges and I let it go. I have a real gun, just in case now. My neighbor and I struck up a friendship and we now watch each other's places when we are out of town. Hopefully, this never happens again to anyone else. And yes, I had the locks changed in case you were wondering. I live in a small rural community in the eastern US. It's a nice little town. Because of my work in the medical field, I met some interesting folks. I'm also familiar with law enforcement and emergency personnel. Small town life is not as dull and uneventful as people think, especially since everybody knows somebody who knows somebody. I have a lot of stories to share, but this one just happened, so I'll start here. Because it's still very recent and the investigation is ongoing, I have to be vague in some details, but I needed to tell someone. I'm single and I live alone. Due to a stalker, I moved twice, but that's another story for another time. However, it is relevant for this story for multiple reasons. The first reason being that I have a dog for the sake of protection, as well as have motion sensors and outdoor security cameras. The second reason being the location of my home, which is literally down the street from the fire department. I can see it from my living room window, and a couple of blocks from the police station. However, next to the fire department is the road department, which is basically a parking lot where they park their road equipment and empty garbage trucks at night on the weekends. Oddly, it doesn't have any security cameras. Small town life, I suppose. My house sits on a hill with a good view of that side of the street. Due to the incline, the large trees in the front yard, and the half cornfield on my property next to me, most people on the street below would have noticed me in the backyard unless they were actively looking. However, I can see the street clearly. This incident happened Saturday evening. The county was holding its annual Independence Day spiel with a community barbecue, music, fireworks, and everything. I didn't attend because it was just not my thing. Plus, I have a dog and the sounds of fireworks could be traumatizing. Before the big show, I took the dog out to relieve herself in the backyard. There was still at least an hour of daylight, but the entire neighborhood was pretty quiet, because mostly everyone was at the fairgrounds or other various holiday events. So when an unfamiliar, large white pickup drove slowly down the street, I noticed. It must have turned around at the end of the street because I saw it again, move it in the opposite direction, only about 20 seconds later. This time, it turned into the parking lot of the road department. Now people have been known to toss things into the empty garbage trucks, usually at night to avoid getting caught, because they don't want to or are unable to make the trip to the landfill themselves. Usually it's things like furniture or broken equipment, but I didn't see any of those things in the back of this truck. The driver was a somewhat stocky guy of average height. He took 3 large black trash bags from the bed of his truck and tossed them one by one into the hopper of the garbage truck, and then he left. And now I swear I'm not one of those meddling rear window types who always thinks activity is suspicious and that their neighbors are up to no good, but something about this didn't sit right with me. Normally, when I see people tossing their garbage into the trucks and leaving, I don't bother reporting it because it's relatively harmless. But this time, I had a gut feeling, and so I called the police. If anything, they could get the guy for illegally dumping trash from a barbecue or whatever. While I'm on the phone with dispatch, I put my dog inside to cut down on distractions while the officers investigate. A few minutes later, an officer arrived and I crossed the street to meet him, gave him a description of the events, and pointed out which of the trucks the man had tossed the bags. He found the bags and he took photos. He put on gloves and told me to stay back. The bags were tied in a knot at the top and it took him a minute to untie one because of the gloves and how tight the knot was, but eventually he got it open. looked inside for a few seconds and then twisted it closed and took a few steps back. Holy crap, he hissed under his breath. What? It's a body. I felt sick, and I could tell that he did too. I saw him grow pale, his hand was trembling when he held the radio. Even his voice was shaking as he gave the code to dispatch. The dispatcher sounded confused when she asked him to repeat it. Within 10 minutes, the county sheriff was on the scene. He even looked sick at the contents of the bag. The coroner arrived about 10 minutes after that, and the first officer walked me back to the house along with another one, who arrived at the same time. Though I showed the first cop via the app on my phone when I described the events initially, I now showed them the video on a larger screen. The camera caught footage of the truck as it drove by both times, as well as pulling into the parking lot, though unfortunately not a clear view of the license plate or of the man tossing the bags out of frame. We watched the footage over and over, pausing frames and the officers taking notes. Ultimately, they requested this footage as well as a copy of the files from the past week, to see if the truck had been in the area before. I've also been saving footage until the road department installs their own camera this week. Because this is still fresh, I don't know how many more details. I know the body was in pieces, but I don't know the age of the victim, the gender, or the cause of death. The information hasn't been released to the public. I don't know if they've been able to identify the body yet either. A police cruiser has been parked at the fire department next door for constant surveillance in case the guy decides to come back. The guy who did this was likely a local. How else would he know to dump it here? He probably thought it would get buried in other people's illegal trash accumulated over the holiday weekend, and the sanitation crew wouldn't have bothered to investigate. When I think about how this guy lives in my community, it makes me feel physically ill. To think that he had clearly scouted the area for a dump site, that it may not have been the first time this had happened, and that this could happen again. If I hadn't have called it in, if I hadn't been in the backyard at that exact moment, or if I had ignored that gut feeling, the victim would have never been found, may never find potential justice, and their loved ones may never have closure. In fact, there's a possibility that it just might happen again to another poor soul. I hope it's not me. Dear God, please don't let it be me. I think it's time that I moved again. Third time's a charm, right? My friend and I got an Airbnb to this mountain house in Bloomingburg, New York, to do some mushrooms and enjoy the forest. It, from the outside perspective, seemed like a great getaway with even more things to do in the surrounding areas. The Airbnb host was highly rated, 4.9 stars, with 450 plus glowing reviews about the house and the trails in the state forest across the road. The house was normally $300 a night, but it was down to $75. It was a spontaneous trip that we threw together within a week. Not much forethought. We thought a lot more about what we needed for our shrooms trip and being on the hiking trails. This was a grave mistake. I had a bad feeling the night before we left that I couldn't shake, but eventually got to bed. I only slept about 4 hours, but thought to myself in the morning that I was psyching myself out, and that everything would be fine. We arrived a few hours prior to check-in and placed our food in the basement fridge before we headed out onto the trails. The house from the outside looked old but not horrible. We were pleased at this point as the sun was coming out and it looked beautiful. We spoke with the host on the phone about the local area, and he sent us a Google Doc with all the trails, how far they were, and some off-trail destinations that he provided images and directions to. He claimed that he grew up in the area and was pushing for us to go to this lake 4 miles down along the state forest border. He also said to us that we may run into some locals, and to tell them Brandon sent you and you'll be good. One of the first red flags. I called him, and after almost 20 minutes of oversharing about his personal connection to the home, he finally provided me with a map, location, and directions to this lake. We hadn't actually gone inside the main part of the house yet and decided to head on our way there. As we were entering, there was an Asian man parked in the lot by the trailhead. He was old and sitting on a stool, inscribing a parchment with symbols. We didn't think much of it and continued on. The first place we found, we sat down and took our shrooms and tried to mentally prepare. We were looking for the lake for about an hour, but the host's directions were misleading, and we weren't sure where we were. The images led us to a fork in the trail that led into a densely wooded area. He told me on the phone when we had reached this point to go left off the main trail for about 2 miles. I know enough about hiking to know that this is a dumb idea, especially on shrooms. So we turned around and headed back to a beautiful waterfall that we saw about 2 miles from the entrance. We spent about an hour there, barefoot in the stream that fed into the waterfall. The shrooms kicked in and it was fun, but we both kind of felt like we were being watched. There were ominous undertones and the sun started to fade, so we thought that we should head back to the house, check in, regroup, and plan out the rest of the day. We arrived back at the entrance to see the Asian man sitting there like a statue, and I was uncomfortable, so I decided to try and be polite and say hello. He slowly turns to me blank-faced, stares at me, and then looks back down at his parchment. We both look at each other like, okay, let's go, and walked over to the house, which was across the street. We entered the house to a high-style ranch setup where the front immediately feeds into 2 staircases, one's going up on the right and one going down on the left. As I look down, I see a door leading to what seemed like the ground level, with multiple locks on it that said private, taped onto it with parchment paper. This was incredibly unnerving, and I immediately felt uncomfortable in the home. The air felt strange and heavy. Everything was coated in a layer of dust, despite the cleaning lady being in there while we were gone. While once we went up the stairs to our left, there was a long hallway to our right. The hallway had many doors, some without knobs, and it felt like something you would see in a horror movie. The bedrooms were Victorian style with very old bedding and woodwork. Everything about this place screamed murder house, and we decided to go back out into the camping area and think about what we wanted to do. As we were sitting outside, I began to get an overwhelming feeling that I was being watched again. My hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I heard something in the woods about 20 yards away from us. We saw a deer about 10 minutes prior, and my friend said that it was probably that, and continued to play music on his speaker to calm down. I tried to calm down, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I told him to turn it down. I took out my hunting knife and I looked around. As I'm looking, I hear more rustling in the woods. At this point, I was thoroughly spooked and told my friend to go get his stuff. I didn't care how high I was. I needed to get the heck out of there immediately. As we were leaving, I realized that the entire ground level windows around the sides of the house were blacked out and boarded up. I wasn't sure if somebody was watching us from the house or the woods, but I didn't want to find out. It also occurred to me that the man we saw in the entrance was only about 50 yards away from us. We hastily threw our stuff into the car and pulled off. As I was driving off, the Asian man was no longer sitting in his stool and his car was empty. He had disappeared. Thank God we stuck with our gut and didn't go to the lake. I was having trouble reading the map on shrooms, but upon later inspection, there was no lake anywhere to be found. Not only this, but we realized many of the reviews on his accounts were fake, and some of the pictures were too. I still wonder who we would have run into if we would have made it to the lake. The host told us we would likely run into people and to make sure to say that he sent us, but luckily I never found out, considering we were on shrooms. I tried to reanalyze the situation to see if there were any points where I may have just been having a bad trip. In retrospect, I think my senses were even more heightened to the bad energy of that place, and I'm glad that I trusted my intuition. It was July 1st. Everyone in my family, including family friends, went to see the fireworks in our local town. We live in Canada and have been celebrating Canada Day before I was born. 3 years ago is when this happened. They all left for fireworks and I decided I wanted to stay home. It was around 8 o'clock, which was fairly dark out, since the summers around here are usually bright until late into the night. My house is one story. My room is in the front of the house with a window showing the road, and we also have a big long deck from my window to the other side of the house. My room is set up where my bed is horizontally next to my window. My gaming console and TV are not facing the window, but are next to it as well. I was playing a video game, and next I hear a weird thud. And then again and again this same thud keeps coming closer to my window. As this thud gets closer, I hear a cough. I once thought that it was an animal, but I'm now certain it was a man since I can hear his deep cough. I'm staring at my window, frozen in fear, when I see a man dressed in all black, wearing a big black jacket. The man is fairly older, since he has gray hair and a gray beard. He smiles at me as I snack back to reality and take my phone and run to my parents' room to wait to call the police. And they never found this man, but even 4 years later, this still freaks me out. This happened just last night, and I'm really confused and don't know what to make of it. I was smoking a cigarette out of my window and was in a relaxed mood. I live in a very large, wooded area with a large lot and lots of wetlands and forest around the edges. I looked out the window up from my phone and saw a shimmer from the back of the woods, coming out of the trail that we have back there maybe 100 yards away. It looked like something walking on all fours for the first part, and then it stood upright and got right behind a very large, wide tree in the middle of the yard. I turned on my phone light and I believe that's why it hid behind the tree. I quickly turned up my phone light brightness and had my fiancé shine a flashlight out the window. And then maybe 10 feet up the tree, I saw what looked like a triangular head peek around and look at the light shining on it. It was only for a split second, but it freaked me out due to how tall it was. I instantly was very scared, and I shut the windows and curtains. Later on, my fiancée woke me up and said she thought she saw someone standing in the tall reeds right outside my window. I looked with a light again, but couldn't really tell if something was there because the reeds are very thick. I went back out there in the morning and found a piece of a rubber beach ball and a woman's Venus brand razor behind the tree. This is all just very odd to me, and I wanted to see if anyone had any experiences with this. This happened last autumn. I was hiking by myself, as I usually do, in a state forest near where I live that I heard was a nice secluded place to enjoy a walk in the woods. It was a gorgeous fall afternoon. The sky was a lovely blue with a few clouds. The sun was warm, and there was a slight breeze. When I walked down to a large pond, I could hear birds in the trees and a group of people talking and laughing on the far side of this pond. An occasional prop airplane passed overhead. I walked on a trail along a small ridge above one side of the pond. I got to the far side of the pond after about half an hour of meandering, and the trail just disappeared. I reasoned with myself that as long as I stayed within sight of the pond, I couldn't get too lost. And so I wandered into the woods a bit deeper, to get around a marshy area and continued on my way. After a few minutes, I came out of the trees onto the edge of the pond. I crept close to the edge of the water to see what I could see, and then it hit me. It was absolutely silent. I got goosebumps and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. There wasn't a single other sound besides my breathing. No birds and no bugs and no people. Not even a hint of a breeze. I slowly turned around to face the trees that I had just emerged from. I had the vague idea that when the forest goes completely silent, it means that there's some sort of predator around. I looked through the trees. I didn't see anything, but I was filled with dread and feeling very uneasy. I realized I didn't have any cell service, and no one knew that I was hiking in this forest. I had about 3 hours of daylight left. At this point, I thought I was roughly halfway around the pond. I didn't want to go back the way that I came, because that gave me bad feelings. I knew I couldn't stay where I was, so that only left going forward. After 5 minutes, the normal forest sounds returned and stayed, but I was on edge the rest of the hour and a half that it took me to get back to my car. I hike by myself all the time, and I have never been afraid in a forest before. But that one, I was convinced I was going to die in that forest that afternoon. I still have no idea what was in there with me, and I refuse to go back. These stories all happened to me at a popular national park. They are true, and while they might not be the craziest stories out there, I find them interesting. The first story starts with me trekking into the desert on my own. In my mid-20s, I started to camp and hike alone quite a bit, and when I hiked, I would seek as remote of a location as possible. I'm a 5'5" petite female and honestly made some dumb decisions, wearing headphones while wandering terrain alone, but I had a lot of fun and have since gotten smarter about handling myself in the wilderness. I had hopped in my car and headed to the desert as I often do, and picked a spot to park where there were no cars, tourists, people of any sort. I grabbed my pack and headphones and excitedly hopped out of the car to go off and explore and climb some rocks in the distance. I'm feeling good until I get not even a mile out, and I see this huge bullet in the dirt. My dad, who was law enforcement and was a National Guard, later said the way I described the size, it had to be from a grounded gun, and there was no way anyone could just walk through the desert with this type of weapon. Something about it unsettled me, and I didn't know if I should bring it to the ranger or what. I felt weird taking it with me, so I ended up awkwardly burying it and moving on. For whatever reason, it put me in an intense unease. I felt jumpy and jarred. None of the usual relaxation I have on my tracks. A few steps later, I hear the weirdest noise I've ever heard in my entire life. It was this high-pitched, buzzing electric noise that just encompassed the space around me. Now, if you know the desert, you know the acoustics can sometimes get weird since noise bounces off of rocks. But this was akin to nothing that I've heard, and my instinctual reaction was a sheer panic. I fumble for my phone and surprisingly have reception. So I call my then boyfriend and he tells me it's probably nothing, and that I should go and enjoy myself. I take a few more steps and the noise instantly starts again, louder, and my body is screaming to hightail it back to the car, which I do. I'm stumbling over myself and back on the phone with my boyfriend, feeling like I'm being chased. I make it back and feel a rush of relief as I get in my car. I know this might sound anticlimactic, but the amount of fear I felt in that moment is something that I've never felt before or since. It felt like a warning of sorts to stay the heck away. I strongly believe in intuition, so I trusted my gut that it was not anything good. I'm hoping someone has experienced something similar or has insight. I've yet to Google anything useful. Story 2 takes place at the same national park. One thing I love about this park is there's a fairly decent chance you'll see weird stuff in the sky at night. I attribute it to the fact that there is a military test pilot base fairly close by. But what you see is some really strange phenomena. This was the most interesting one I've seen. The openness of the desert makes it easy to see the beautiful night sky above you. One particular night, I look up and I see some objects flying high up and off in the distance. If I remember correctly, one was white and one was red. They moved in strange formations and at paces too fast for any aerial physics that I know of. I can't imagine the G-force involved, or how we could have technology that allows for speed that fast. I'm in awe watching this for a while, them zipping around, and to make things even more baffling, they moved in diagonal lines at certain points, like literally making acute angle turns on a hairpin. They would also sometimes pause and suspend, and then zip around more. The final spectacular was when I start to see them fly towards each other, and seemingly merge into one object. It then changes color. I can't remember what one, but it changed. This now singular object shines a little brighter than, and then slowly fades out to nothing. I'm sure that I'm missing a few details, but it was one of the most bizarre and amazing things that I've ever seen. Again, I'm guessing that it's probably military related, so either they have some crazy aerial technology, or they're in cahoots with extraterrestrial. The last story is more of an annoyance. I had found some rocks on a main trail, where someone had performed some type of ritual. While I'm not necessarily against the occult, but there was what looked like red there, and that I was absolutely not okay with that. Probably just some dumb kids trying to be cool. But yeah, overall, I love nature and the desert in particular. It holds a very special and magical place in my heart. Anyways, thanks for listening to my stories and stay safe out there.